All right, I call the Finance Committee meeting to order. And with that, we have a finance update, and I turn it over to you, Jeff.
Good afternoon, council members. Our first agenda item is a finance update. There were several topics I thought that were just worth being informative about that maybe the committee would be interested in. And some of it is administrative. So we'll just go through the list here. The first one is the approval of committee minutes. We will have an approval of committee minutes. The next three, this and the last two meetings will be in the next meeting for minutes approval. Clerk staff was at a conference and had vacation, so didn't get it into this meeting, but it will be in the next meeting. So we'll get caught up on that. The next item is a forecast. So especially in discussions with the property tax levy Lidliff, it's a good time to do a forecast. I ran out of time to get it into this meeting, but we'll be working on it in the month coming up so that in the next meeting, we should have some kind of forecast for this year, probably in next year, based on information we have. Along with that, I would say, as far as some indicators, we're seeing sales tax, and I'll probably mention this again with the general fund report, seems to be flattening out. Through March, we're about 20,000 behind where we were at the same time last year. So it's not we're not trailing by a lot, but we are kind of hovering about where we've been. And that's about 98,000 under what we budgeted. So that's kind of where sales tax is. Another trend I'm seeing is one-time sales tax. We don't have, I think we've had one of the large projects finished up last year, which I think is Vantage Point. Across the street, I think they're finishing that up as well, probably this year. So we're seeing that decline quite a bit. I don't know if there's going to be any new projects that are permitting $15 million or more, but I'll talk to development. Usually they tell me what's going on. So, but I had talked to Public Works and about the development fund, and they had said well, there's not much development going on right now. So we're keeping a close eye on that one. That one seems like we're on a downturn just for the one-time sales tax.
With construction costs, interest rates and stuff, that's not surprising.
Right.
Hopefully we see a turn on that.
Right. One bright spot is real estate excise tax. That seems to be a little bit on the upswing. We're through March, we have had 9 more transactions than we did through the same time last year, which doesn't sound like much, but it had been decreasing. So it's nice to see it increase. And as far as the sales numbers go, we're about 12 million ahead of where we were at this time last year. So that looks like it's at least holding steady or getting a little bit better. So at least on the real estate excise tax side for capital projects, that looks decent. Have heard through some finance colleagues about possible economic slowdown, just anecdotal stuff. And like you mentioned with interest rates and everything, seems to be they've heard stories of it's really easier to hire a contractor right now when it hasn't been. Just things like that. So I'm going to be talking to the state economic, or at least checking in with the state economic forecast council just to get information from them, see what's going on there. So that's, as far as the forecast, that's kind of some of the things that are circulating around it and that would influence probably what numbers that we're going to have. CIP process, this is...
If I may,
sorry.
May I ask a question at this point?
Sure.
Or just in general, did you want to hold until the...
Okay.
So regarding the sales tax being flat, can you sort of expand a little bit on, how that's predictive? I mean, we get a check once every quarter or whatever. How do you, what kind of factors go into your predictions and that stuff?
Well, the way sales tax works is we receive the sales tax monthly, 2 months after we've earned it. So usually that would mean January and December would reflect your holiday season. So you'd hope to see growth compared to the prior year if things are growing. Or if, there's more sales than not, of course. So as far as predicting sales tax, we look at the trends and see how it's growing, and it had been growing 3 to 4% a year, but now it's not showing that. So I don't know exactly what you mean by predicting it.
Well, I mean, if you're saying it's flat now, I mean,
Right.
in other words, how many months of, basically looking back does it take for you to be able to talk about looking forward 6 months or 3 months?
I'd say generally halfway through the year. So in June, the budget, I think, assumed 5% growth in sales tax, and it doesn't look like that's gonna happen. So usually through June, we'll have a good half a year of data, and we can drill down into it and see what sectors are growing and not growing, and forecast off of that.
Okay, and I don't mean to, but I'll let go of it, Ev, but it's April, and it sounds like you're able to have some confidence in speaking as to the whole year. And so I'm just, wondering.
Well, the March numbers came in, they come in at the end of the month, and so they came in last week, and so that's really new information. That's the first time since I've been looking at the sales tax where we've trailed the prior year. So that kind of tells, my instinct would say, oh, we're not growing as fast as we have been, but we'll wait and see.
Okay, so if
Yeah.
I were to look like, let's say, 7, 8 years past at April, and, I could sort of get an idea up, down, whatever,
Right.
as to how the rest of the year would go.
Right, yeah,
Or is
because you can look at your monthly
That being
trends.
too broad. Okay, all right, thank you.
But what you're saying is, you see something, it's hit the radar, and you're watching it,
Right,
but like in my business and so forth, I get alerted to things, but then I watch, and if I see a trend at a longer period of time that gives me a definitive answer, then I take action.
right. And this is, it's through March is your first quarter, and it's the
Yeah.
first time I think that we would show a decrease from the prior quarter
Yeah,
at any time of the year in the last couple of years.
it'll be interesting to see that breakdown at June in the sectors.
Okay, the next update has to do with our process. This is kind of internal, but there's an external piece to this that I thought would be of interest. Internally, so when we've created the CIP on an annual basis, what we've had is basically two things. We've had an Excel workbook with about 100 tabs in it, one for each project and other stuff, and paper. So, we have a finance person who is keeping track of all this stuff in Excel. Engineers, Public Works is working with them. We'd get paper going back and forth. Andrew, the former Public Works Director, liked his red ink on paper. We didn't have much version control, so things would change, things would get missed, papers going around. And so this year what we're going to do is we have our budget software has a CIP module. And so the Public Works is going to be entering their information into the plan basically online, and the finance department will also be in there online as well. So we're going to have, that's going to be the version control. All conversations about those projects will be kept in the software. It'll be a lot more efficient. So they're getting trained in that. But also, in the external piece is how this can be displayed on our website. And that's why I actually have some links to show what I'm talking about. So if there's somebody in the community who's interested in like a certain capital project and what's happening, they'd be able to go online and specifically look at that project. So I have a couple of links I was going to show that are examples that other cities have. Let me see over here. So, and it's exciting because this is going to be a lot more efficient for everybody. So that's kind of how it would relate to, the city's financial health. So we have, I'm going to show a couple just because you can see the different options. So this is Yuma, Arizona. And it comes up here, and it takes a little bit to load. So this is a map of the city, and you can see all the capital projects are located on this map. And you can click on one of these or come over here to the list of their projects. And so if we go to new facility Fire Station 7. You see in Yuma, they have pictures of what's happening on the project. They show you where the project is on the map. I'm not scrolling the computer. Okay, there we go. You have a project timeline, so information, they have updates on what the timeline is. You have the budget, how much has been expended, funding source. So there's a lot of information. You have the project manager that you can contact, the current phase they're in, you know, submit questions. And so that's kind of like, you know, if we had the Marina Steps or any capital project, we can have something like this.
So your goal is to have that here in the next couple months, have all those in there?
Right, so once the CIP is approved, sorry,
Yeah.
we could have select projects on, maybe not every
We've
project.
got the CIP as it exists today, and of
Right.
course, we go through the approval process where priorities get moved up and down. How are, is there a method to rate priorities or anything like that, like we do in the TIP portion of it, or whatever?
In the CIP? Yeah, so that would be part of the process where Public Works makes a request, and then they actually prioritize things as they go through the workflow.
And of course, like I said, we've got the approved CIP, so I assume you're just starting with that, getting that all in, that needs to be in.
Right. So the CIP would still be a document, but this would be like a web-based add-on.
No, it's great.
I won't show the other one. The other city was Pasco, and that was really to show that they have a lot less that they're showing than this. That was just to demonstrate there's different options of what you can demonstrate.
Oh.
And being a smaller city, maybe they don't want everybody calling their public works director or something, so. We can minimize this somehow.
Well, there is the place to make comments in the website, so it's not like, you know,
Yeah,
it's like they're busting down their door.
right. So I just wanted to demonstrate, we're getting away from paper and spreadsheets and getting a more efficient process that I think will be more informative for the public. Yeah.
Yeah, yes, go ahead.
Just, you know, just first order approximation, how much staff time is it taking? I'm assuming basically keying all this stuff in is a non-trivial exercise.
So I think we actually can import it in, so we can take our existing capital budget. I know if, you're shocked to hear that.
I'm sorry, no, I mean, I wasn't being, that was a legit, you know, yeah.
Yeah, so we're, one of the finance staff members who's in charge of working on this is gonna import the existing capital budget in there, probably this week or next week, in time for the engineers to do some interactive training with the vendor.
And no more 100 tabs?
Correct.
Thank you.
Sure. I figured you'd like that part. Next, bond proceeds investment. It had been asked last year during a council meeting if we were going to move the bond proceeds into the LGIP, but we hadn't talked to our arbitrage consultant. So arbitrage is, if you earn too much interest, you have to give the excess back to the federal government. So in January, we talked to our arbitrage consultant, and we moved the bond proceeds into LGIP in January. So that's been really healthy for our interest revenue.
Good to hear. Is there, so they allowed it.
Right.
Is there any compensation for like inflation rates and things like that? Where, you know, if you make more than, I don't know, 6%, right, but the inflation rate's 8%,
Right.
is there anything in those guidelines for that kind of thing?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Arbitrage is pretty complicated. I think that's why we have a
Yeah,
consultant.
well, that's a complicated question too.
Yeah, I could probably follow up on that one.
I mean, it just seems to me that they should allow to compensate, especially what we've dealt with over the last couple of years.
Yeah, I think their position was we should max out how much interest we can earn, and if we give some back to the federal government, that's fine. Because at least we've maximized the earnings and not just kept it in our checking and not earned any, you know, as much. So they do an annual calculation. I don't know if it's annual, but in a couple of years they'll do a calculation once the bond proceeds, we've had them for a couple of years. Because we're supposed to be spending them, so hopefully we're spending them, but they'll take all that into account. And they do that with our 2018 bonds as well. Next item is a long-term financial plan. Came up with the discussion on biennial budgeting, and it's not something I'm ready to bring to committee yet, but I'm researching it. I've reached out to the city of Sammamish. I heard that they have a long-term financial plan. They gave me a contact name for a financial consultant. The firm is Baker Tilly. So I got that information yesterday. The city of San Clemente has a long-term financial plan and website, which is amazing, but they've had 14 people working on it every year. So I'm trying to balance. I'd want it to be something that's of value to the city and to the public, that creates a good framework, for the budget process, but at the same time isn't a burden to staff, where it's such a big project that all we're doing is working on a plan and not getting our work done. So it's kind of it has to be appropriate for the size of our city.
Keep working on it, man. Sounds good.
So that's just kind of,
Got the right things in mind.
that was just a takeaway from the biennial budgeting presentations. And then the last item is one that I had on the work plan. It was mentioned with the levy lid lift, which is replacement vehicle assessments. So that is an area where you have three different departments involved. So you have finance and you have public works and largely police. You might have marina have cars, but three main departments are those three. And I think historically it's been hard for all three to get on the same page. And part of that, I think, was technology, as far as, a lack of technology. So again, another Excel-based process where finance has a set of records and maybe Public Works has their set of records. But one of the things that Public Works has spearheaded in the last couple of years is called Fleetio. It's another online system. So we're all going to be at least working from the same set of data. So that's good, and I think we've been making progress as far as working together. So, because I think we see the shortfall in funding that we've had because of the pandemic, and so we can't afford not to be on the same page in planning. So I think that's kind of what I wanted to bring up as far as that's concerned. Let's see if I wrote anything else down. Yeah, the assessment is done annually as part of the budget process. So we're going to be doing that in May or June. So we'll have to at that time see where we stand as far as the amount of money we're behind, as far as what we need to set aside for replacing cop cars, given that the fleet grew like it did over the last couple of years. So that's just those are just kind of updates I thought that the committee should just at least be aware of. And if there's any questions, I can take any questions on that.
Councilmember Harris.
So everybody's going to be, in the garage, there's like one basic vehicle maintenance that is segregated into three different areas, right? Police and Public Works and city general stuff. Stop me if I'm, but we're able to, what does the software do when you say everybody getting on the same page? What does that?
Well, it's a schedule, basically it's the schedule of all the vehicles that are owned by the city, and it maintains, keeps track of their useful lives. It also is where they can record the maintenance costs on each vehicle. Any upgrades and all of that. So that there's a public works side where they're entering in that information. So if we have two mechanics, and so if one of the mechanics spends a certain amount of time working on a car doing repairs, then those costs can be recorded. And as far as finance goes, we can also see what vehicles have been sold, what should have been added. So we don't get surprised by a car purchase or something, which hasn't happened really here, but so we are able to we are able to monitor the value of the cars.
Okay, but basically just in terms of efficiency for the bond thing or the levy, it'll make it faster for you to be able to hit a button and say, I would like to see, you know, the current value or the current depreciation or the current, or the expected purchases we'll need on police vehicles.
Right, it's like we would have more of a real-time status on the vehicles instead of having something in Excel and wondering like, well, I wonder what happened there, you know, because it hasn't been updated for, you know, a year or so.
Okay, and this is something that just the staff, it's transparent to them. They're just entering their project code when the guy changes the oil or whatever, and it magically happens.
Yes.
Groovy, thanks.
A lot of the vehicle values are based on engine hours, or at least particular the police in general, versus miles.
Yeah, I think we've been, what the standard practice has been, or at least the historic practice, has been really, as far as at least the finance side goes, is a vehicle's purchased and it's been assigning it 6 years of life. So the vehicle hours and miles are being tracked, but just from the accounting side, we're like, oh, well, that is going to have a useful life of 6 years. But the problem's been is that we've been replacing cars probably because they come up on the schedule, but we need to actually ask, does that vehicle need to be replaced? So, you know, and that's where you look at your maintenance costs. If your maintenance costs are too high and it's worth getting a new car, then you can make a more informed decision.
It could work either way. If it had a lot of engine hours,
Right.
and that you thought would be 6, and they ends up with 4 years of life.
Exactly.
Or like you said, something that can go 8 or 10.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So I think it's better information just in general.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
So next is the animal control finance report. So, really quick, before we get started on this one, I was surprised to see this on because I kind of assumed that through the budgeting process, the city manager, yourself, and the department managers would be looking at these kind of things. We expect, obviously, to challenge you and your team to, and the city manager to look at costs and, you know, be as accurate, find any cuts they can find and so forth. And it seems like that seems to be the role here. So I was surprised to see this, you know, before we get started. I was talking to Councilmember Nutting, and he kind of felt the same way. So anyway, I just would like to stress that we don't want to micromanage here. That's not our job. Later on, when you come to us before the budget and you've looked at departments and you've evaluated some of the cost reductions you can do, I think that's when we want to see it,
Okay.
rather than these one-offs like this where I think it takes your time and might not be necessary. Okay, so anyway,
Agreed on my end.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how it managed to get here, but
anyway, go ahead. You did on the time of the report, so give us what you got.
Okay. Okay, so the animal control, the reason or how it ended up on the committee was there was a request for this information, and I think that we've been hearing it through different avenues. So that's how it ended up on the agenda. So to take a quick look at it, for animal control, the history, you have the animal control expenditures on the schedule on the top of the page in the packet. Starting in 2018, going through 2023, there's a dark bold line down the side of the column to the right of 2021. Is to signify that's about when we made the change from a full-time staff person to a third-party Burien Cares. So that's why you see the salary and wages and personnel benefits, all of that drop off pretty much after that line. But if you look at it year by year, the costs or the expenditures for animal control in 2018 were a little over 116,000. They dropped to about 82,000 in 2019, increase again in 2020 to 103,000, and increase again in 2021 to about 155,000. So at the time of those expenditures, animal license revenue pretty much remains less than $2,000, except 2019 it eked out about $2,100, but collections were pretty small. You can see after 2022, or after 2021, 2022, the expenditures were a little over 64,000. In 2023, they're about 110. You can see the animal license revenue was much more. in relative terms, so 13,533 in 2022, and in 2023 is like about the same, 13,351. So that's about 11,000 more a year than was being collected beforehand. In this year, as of February 29th, kennel services were costing us about 18,333 a month. I'm sorry, as a total, 9167 per month. We've had 2 invoices. In comparison to our neighboring cities, Burien paid 259,000 in 2022 and 277,000 in 2023 to Burien Cares. SeaTac uses King County Services, and they paid 165,000. What I did notice, as far as the financial numbers, it seems like kenneling of animals increased when we made the switch to Burien Cares, and then again, our license fees increased and our costs were down. So that would be my summation of just looking at it historically as far as animal control costs.
Any questions before we move on? Councilmember Harris.
Just speaking roughly, how much time did it take to prepare that report? I'm not trying to put you on the spot. If you don't know, you can tell
maybe
me another time.
probably 30 minutes or so.
Okay, thanks, man.
City Manager George.
Thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to provide a little more info on why this item was discussed. We've been getting some comments and feedback from the public concerned about this Burien Cares contract. So part of this was just to look at the cost structure and see that there is a significant savings over the years from moving to the contract rather than in-house. I've also talked to the police department, and what this contract involves is essentially a Burien Cares employee who essentially works out of the police department and is assigned to the city of Des Moines. So they're very satisfied with the level of service that we're receiving at a lesser dollar amount than having this in-house. And so I think, as we look at the budget and as we look at every kind of service that we provide and how we provide it, there are opportunities for us to contract out services, and that could potentially save us some money. What's interesting is when you look at everything, we've done a lot of those already. When there's an opportunity for cost savings, we have contracted that out, which is going to make it a little bit difficult when we're talking about filling a larger budget gap when we've already done so many cost savings that are out there. So that's just information. But I think, taking a look at this right up front to see that we have savings here, we're getting a good service, putting this out there that, we can look at everything, but this is probably not a place that we're going to be able to find any sort of savings.
And my point was simply that not to design to micromanage your operations. It's during the budget process, if you do evaluation stuff, what we see is you guys coming forth with us going, we looked at, these were the costs of the operations. We're going to propose in the budget, we're going to cut 5%, and this is how we're going to do it. Those kind of things in an overview in the conjunction and flow of the regular work. What I'm trying to prevent is us doing something outside the box that deters from where we're going. And that was my comment.
Yeah, no, and that's good. But I think, even now, we know, we know that we need to look at every aspect of the budget. And that's something that we're not, as staff, we're not waiting until we start the formal budget process. We're trying to consider everything now, right? Everything that we can now. And as we build towards that. So, we may have other ideas that we bring forward to the Finance Committee moving forward before the budget process even starts.
And that's as long as it's in the conjunction of doing your regular business. Yep. That's all. I just don't want to have us set a precedent of one-offs. Okay. That that don't make sense. Just to answer a question for us when it may be better 2 months later in the flow, rather than outside the box.
If I may, question.
Councilmember Harris.
It's just a fact that our pet licensing revenue was dramatically larger in years past. We're not looking back far enough, and I far be it from me to defy the will of the committee, but to me, this, if you, if you put off the scrub into these master meetings, basically, you can't scrub anything. To my mind, this is the place to do these kinds of departmental things, but your point is well taken. I would just say that we are not capturing anywhere near the revenue that we used to back when our population was like 12–15% less, and I'm pretty sure there are more doggies and kitties than there used to be. So just, if there's some way we can go out there and get that 20 grand or whatever, 20 grand is 20 grand. Thank you.
Moving on to the monthly general fund report for February 24.
So the report through February shows total operating revenues of $3.8 million, total operating expenditures of almost 4.3, operating loss of about a little over 486,000. So it's odd probably to hear me say I thought these numbers were a little encouraging, because you have to remember we don't get property tax revenue in January and February. So you have to keep that in mind when looking at the first quarter or third quarter numbers. So in the highlights for this report, that is one of the highlights, is we do not collect property tax. That's our top revenue source. Other comments, as far as revenue we don't have on here, gambling tax is not really significant, but we collect that quarterly. Same with the sound transit funds that would come into the general fund. Those are more significant, but we collect those quarterly. So that's some revenue pieces that aren't showing up there. Business, on the other end of the revenue coin is categories where we've collected a lot, and that's going to probably be the highest amount for the year. B&O tax and business licenses, we have annual filers that comes in before, well, B&O tax, the deadline is actually end of this month. And then, of course, business license renewals. And so that kind of shows up really strong on the report. Other than that, I was encouraged that the operating expenditures were under budget by $250,000. But that's good news financially, but that also means we most likely have vacancies in police. So, it's a little selfish for finance to be excited about that, but because public safety is probably more important than a happy finance director sometimes. But that's kind of what's driving the balancing out the expenditures as far as overall.
Councilmember Harris.
Just running down quickly, can you give me an example of culture and recreation?
That would be anything related to parks.
Okay. And please don't take any of this as like, gotchas. I'm just curious where. How about rentals and leases? Just any example.
Well, that would be, I think that is included in culture and recreation. So rentals and leases, is there a line item that you're looking at?
Yeah. That in the other revenues subtotal thingy. It's like around, Fund 114, 3 or 4 lines up.
It's up almost 1,300%, but we're only talking.
I just was giving it. I just wanted an example of what that is. It's fine. Community events and services. Can you give me an example of just something like that that's happened? Is it like
that again is parks, and then events and services would be the events and facility rentals.
Okay. My only other thing is at what point, or am I just totally missing it, and I'm sorry, but where we're gonna see like debt service? Is there a way to get some kind of little dashboard on just the current bonds that we issued last year?
Yeah, we can put together.
I mean, again, if that's not something, but that is something, I'm just expressing a desire. I would like to see a dashboard of current debt service. Just if,
What would
That's
you,
cool.
I don't have an issue with the debt service, but what's a realistic and reasonable interval that we would see those, like every 6 months or something like that, where we see a pattern or change of where we are? Or is it every 3 months?
So we pay, we make bond payments, primarily interest payments in June, and then principal and interest in December.
So twice a year, I think.
Yeah,
is
twice a year. The general fund contributes to the payment on the 2018 bonds, and I have that with 1/12 coming out of the general fund every month. But it would be easy to show what our debt service would be for 2024,
Okay.
or even.
But are realistically, in 2024, when you're reporting out on the halves, when we get to see the trend, that's probably the July or August meeting that you would realistically have that? That'd be an opportune time to look at that as well?
Or I could bring it in the next meeting and just show
Just to
us.
catch us up, but then make those the intervals. Again, I don't want to do certain things that don't move the needle every month is what I'm after.
but just to be clear, this is, and I don't mean to, be disparaging, oversimplify, but it's really just like, fund, like 112 or whatever the GL code is, and you hit a button, and then it just gives you, debits
And,
and credits.
that was my point is, I see your value in what your request is, but it doesn't seem like intervals of 6 months seem to be reasonable, other than just
Yeah,
a
no,
quick
no,
update.
no, you'll hear me, a repeating thing is like, basically, what's the cost? I mean, literally, what is the cost for Jeff in terms of staff time? If it's 15 minutes, groovy. If it's 3 hours.
I get you, I was
then
just
that's-
clarifying the intervals that we would report it at in his
Yeah.
agreement. Okay, that's great, thank you.
Then, if I can.
Oh, wait, let's go to City Manager George real
I
quick.
just wanted to make some points here, make sure we're clear on everything. So when you talked about the 2018 bond payments, those were coming out of the general fund, or a portion of.
Portion of it does. But
And can you explain what the 2018 bond was for?
I know it was a refinancing bond, and I wasn't here then, so sometimes I forget. The 2018 bond, so it was refinancing, I think, an investment in the marina. I can't remember specifically what was financed with the marina. It wasn't the North Bulkhead, I don't think, but it was.
And then, just to clarify, the current bonds would not be affected, they don't affect this general fund?
No, not at all.
Okay.
Thanks, Tim, for the clarification. Anything else you have for us?
No, I'm just gonna follow up on the rentals and leases, that is, as it sounds, like the field house, activity center, whatever we're leasing. So that would be the revenue that came in from that.
And other things like SR3, we own the property, they pay a monthly lease agreement, quarter deck, same thing. Other areas that's where the city owns property and leases it.
Yeah, okay. Really quick, since we've kind of cleared the agenda, I just want you to talk about the levy lift a little bit here. There was some information out there claiming a 64% increase on it and so forth, and if you could just clear up the actual information.
Okay, so just, I think I know what you're getting at. So currently, per thousand value of your property, the assessed value, the current rate is around about 90 cents per thousand. The levy lid lift is asking for a lift to lift that amount up to $1.40 per thousand. So it's about it's a 55% increase, or a 50 cent per thousand increase. We normally, the way property tax works is you can increase it, you use the amount you collected the prior year, and you can, by state law, you're allowed to increase that 1% if you choose, or if council chooses. And so that restricts the property tax revenue. So if your expenditures are growing at 6%, 13%, and your main property tax, your main source of revenue is property tax or one of the top ones, and you're limited to 1% growth, then all of a sudden that gap's gonna grow over time, especially in our inflationary environment.
And again, of the property taxes everybody pays, a little bit less than 8% actually goes to the city,
Correct.
correct? So this would roughly take it up to just shy of 9% of that pool of money.
Correct. So when you pay your property tax bill, there are various taxing districts that you're paying to. So schools, for example, libraries. I think in Des Moines, we typically are the number 5
Yeah.
out of the whole list.
And it sounds like it keeps us at the 5th.
Right, yeah, we
Right.
probably will, because I don't think we'd compare to how much the school districts and the state schools are
Or the fire county.
taxing. Right.
Okay. All right, thank you. Councilmember Harris.
And this is not, but basically, if anybody puts some kind of information out there, you'll find this ironic, and they don't show their work, that annoys me tremendously. For someone to say, to make an inflammatory statement like tax increase 64% without even, explaining how they came to that, and especially if you kind of sort of know how this process works, I think that's not very sporting. I'm just, it really is, the public, come on, just at least be fair. Show your work. If you have a beef with any of this stuff, fine. But I'm just concerned whenever there's a.
Councilmember
people
Harris,
can
on
just
the rare
say-
occasion, I couldn't agree with you more. Absolutely.
Because the thing is, it's not like every year I've watched Jeff and his predecessors, Danielle, and they do this thing, simply the percentage goes up or whatever, basically to just keep that dollar amount at a certain spot. And, so it's just, man, I don't know. I would never do something like that without providing at least some kind of link to our discussions and the documents from which, anyway, that's it.
Or to include, as you were talking about the 6% on top of the 13%, which is really about a 20% increase, not talk about the revenues not matching up, and the fact that we subsidize things with ARPA money, and adding some of the additional officers and so forth. So yes, definitely paints a picture that seems bleak, like a fall off a cliff, but it's not the case at all. So appreciate that. Did you have anything else to say?
I'm good, thank you.
Councilmember Harris, before we adjourn?
Again, and I'm just, at an academic debate, I was almost gonna raise a point of order, because I just don't think it's appropriate to defend. I'm not a lawyer, but it's like you're asking Jeff to speculate on what someone was implying, and to defend a case that they have not properly made. And I just don't know what else to say about it. Thank you.
On the Finance Committee, sometimes I think it's important that we clarify numbers here rather than try to attempt a knife in a gunfight on a social media page. All right, thank you. Anything else? All right, with that, a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Do I have a second? Second, all those in favor? Finance Committee is adjourned.